The end is near. Love that once burned brighter than fire is now drowning in silence, pain, and broken promises. Ellen and Brian's story, once filled with passion and unshakable loyalty, is about to take its final, heartbreaking turn. This is not the ending they dreamed of, it is the ending destiny wrote in blood. Everything began with a promise. Ellen and Brian were never meant to meet, yet fate placed them in each other's path. From the very first moment, their connection was undeniable. They carried the same wounds, the same hunger for love, and the same fear of losing it all. They fought against the world to be together, families who disapproved, friends who turned their backs, even their own doubts. Every step forward was marked by sacrifice, every moment of joy shadowed by the threat of tragedy. But through all the storms, they held on. Ellen would whisper that nothing could break them. Brian would smile and say she was the only reason he kept breathing. Their love became their strength, their rebellion, their salvation. Yet behind the passion, cracks were forming. Ellen's heart was heavy with secrets she could not share. Brian's loyalty was torn between love and the dark weight of his past. They thought they could outrun it, but the past always finds a way to return. With every episode, we watch them fight harder, bleed deeper, and love more recklessly. Their laughter felt like a stolen gift, their kisses like borrowed time. And now, in episode 10, everything they fought for is tested in the cruelest way. What began as a dream has turned into a nightmare of choices. For Ellen, it is the decision between saving herself or losing Brian forever. For Brian, it is the moment where love becomes heavier than the life he carries. The road to their ending is not lined with happiness, but with echoes of every sacrifice they made. The shadows they ignored have grown too strong, and destiny is ready to collect its price. The closer they get to each other, the further apart they are pulled. And as their final chapter begins, one truth becomes clear. Not every love story was meant to survive. There comes a time in every love story when the weight of the truth becomes too heavy to hide. For Ellen and Brian, that moment arrived like a storm in the night, silent at first, but impossible to ignore once it broke. Ellen had always carried her pain quietly. She hid the scars of betrayal, the wounds of her past, and the fear that her love for Brian would one day destroy him. She tried to smile through the shadows, to pretend that nothing was wrong. But the eyes that once lit up at his touch began to dim. The voice that once whispered hope now trembled with doubt. Brian felt the change long before Ellen admitted it. He could see it in the way she pulled her hand away too quickly, the way she stared into the distance as if looking for a way out. Love teaches us to notice the smallest cracks because we are terrified of losing what we hold dear. And Brian knew deep inside that Ellen was slipping away. He tried to hold her tighter, but the tighter he held, the further she drifted. Love, after all, is not chains. It is wings. And Ellen's wings were breaking. But it wasn't just Ellen who carried secrets. Brian had his own demons, darker and louder than anything Ellen could imagine. He had fought for her, bled for her, even turned his back on the people who raised him. Yet, in doing so, he created enemies that would never forgive him. Every step he took with Ellen brought danger closer, like shadows growing longer in the fading light. He told her they were safe, that their love was stronger than anything. But his promises were built on lies. He knew that the past would not rest, and when it finally came for him, Ellen would be forced to pay the price too. The tragedy of Ellen and Brian was never just in their love, but in their silence. Instead of speaking the truths that could save them, they hid behind smiles and half-spoken words. Instead of facing the darkness together, they tried to shield each other from it. Ellen thought she was protecting Brian by hiding her pain. Brian thought he was protecting Ellen by hiding his past. In the end, their love became a battlefield where the enemy was not outside, it was within. By the time the truth began to unravel, it was already too late. Ellen found herself standing at a crossroads, torn between saving her own soul and saving the man she loved. Brian found himself facing the ghosts he had run from, knowing that the only way to protect Ellen was to let her go. Their story, once filled with passion and fire, was collapsing under the weight of secrets. Each choice pulled them further apart, yet their hearts still reached for each other. Desperate to hold on just a little longer. This is the cruel beauty of love. It can heal us, but it can also break us in ways nothing else can. Ellen and Brian were no longer the couple who once promised to conquer the world. They were two broken souls, trapped in a storm they had created together, watching helplessly as everything they built began to crumble. And as the curtain rises on episode 10, the audience is left with a haunting question. Can love survive when truth itself becomes the enemy? The silence between Ellen and Brian had grown louder than any argument. Nights once filled with whispered dreams now ended in empty stares, their hearts speaking words their lips refused to confess. The house they once called a haven had become a prison of memories, each corner haunted by laughter that no longer existed. Ellen could not bring herself to meet Brian's eyes, because she feared the reflection of her own guilt staring back at her. And Brian, though desperate to reach her, carried his own shame that chained his every step. Love, when broken, does not shatter at once. It fractures slowly, piece by piece, until one day, you find yourself holding dust instead of diamonds. Ellen remembered the nights when Brian promised her forever, the way he swore no power in the world could take her from him. She believed him once, with all her heart. But belief is fragile, and now it slipped through her fingers like water she could not hold. Every promise that once made her feel safe now echoed like a cruel reminder of what they were losing. Brian, too, was drowning. He fought battles no one could see, battles that scarred him deeper than wounds ever could. The choices he made in the shadows were finally crawling into the light, threatening to expose him for what he had become. He had killed dreams, betrayed trusts, and stained his hands with sins he could never wash away. And as much as he longed to protect Ellen from the truth, he knew the truth was already carving its way into their love. The saddest part was not that they had stopped loving each other, it was that they still loved too much. Ellen's terrors came not because she hated Brian, but because she could not bear to lose him. Brian's anger did not come from resentment, but from the unbearable thought of a life without her. And yet, no matter how tightly they clung to one another, the storm would not relent. It pulled harder, ripping at their bond, demanding a sacrifice neither wanted to make. Then came the moment of collapse. A secret revealed, a lie uncovered, a betrayal that could no longer stay buried. Ellen's voice cracked as she begged for answers, but Brian's silence spoke louder than his words ever could. She realized then that the man she loved had been hiding in the shadows, protecting her from a truth that was not meant to be carried alone. And Brian, staring into her broken eyes, understood that he had lost the one thing he thought he could save. It is a cruel thing, watching two souls who belong to each other drift apart. Their hands reached, trembling, desperate to hold, but their hearts knew the truth. They could not walk the same path anymore. The bond that once felt eternal now lay torn, fragile as glass, sharp enough to cut them both with every memory. And as Ellen turned away, her heart shattered not because she stopped loving Brian, but because love itself had become their greatest enemy. The tragedy of their story is not only in the ending, it is in the love that still burns, fierce and unyielding, even as it destroys them. Episode 10 is not simply the end of a romance. It is the funeral of every promise, the burial of every dream, and the moment when the souls must face the truth that some love stories are destined to end in tears. The end did not come with thunder or fire. It came quietly, like a candle flickering out in the dark, leaving behind nothing but smoke and silence. Ellen stood at the edge of everything she once believed in, her heart torn between the memory of love and the reality of pain. Brian stood across from her, his shoulders heavy with the weight of every mistake, every lie, every choice that led them here. The world around them seemed to pause, as if even time itself could not bear to watch what was about to happen. Ellen's tears did not fall in anger, but in surrender. She had fought for Brian, sacrificed for him, and believed in him even when the truth begged her not to. But love is not always enough. Sometimes love demands a cost too high to pay, and in their case, the price was each other. She whispered his name, not as a question, not as an accusation, but as a farewell. And in that single word, Brian heard everything: her love, her heartbreak, her goodbye. Brian wanted to run to her, to hold her, to swear once more that they could survive anything. But the strength was gone. He had no promises left to give, no walls left to hide behind. He saw in Ellen's eyes the reflection of who he had become, and it broke him more than any wound ever could. He realized then that letting her go was the only way he could protect her, even if it meant destroying himself. And so he stood still, rooted in his own ruin, watching the only light in his life fade into the distance. The silence between them was no longer filled with possibility. It was final, absolute, and suffocating. Ellen turned away, each step echoing like a hammer on his heart. Brian's body trembled as though his very soul was being ripped apart, but he did not call out. He did not chase her. Some endings are not meant to be rewritten, no matter how much the heart bleeds for another chance. And this was theirs. The tragedy of Ellen and Brian was not just in their separation, but in the love that still bound them even as they walked away. They would forever carry each other like ghosts, beautiful, painful, unforgettable. Their story, written in fire and sealed in blood, could not be erased, but it could no longer continue. And as the screen fades to black, the only sound left is the echo of their love breaking, shattering, and finally falling silent. This is the ending no one wanted, but everyone feared. The final chapter of a love that defied the world, only to be defeated by the weight of its own truth. In episode 10, we do not witness victory. We do not witness healing. We witness the cruel reality that even the strongest love can fall, that even the bravest hearts can break. Ellen and Brian's ending is not just sad, it is unforgettable. A haunting reminder that love, no matter how powerful, is not always enough to save us. And as the final words linger, blood of my blood, the audience is left with the chilling truth. Sometimes, the greatest tragedies are born not from hate, but from love itself.